I was still sitting in my car when I realized I hadn't taken a full breath in almost a minute. The envelope from the notary rested on my lap, heavy with the news that had just changed everything. My name is Margaret Bennett, 67 years old, retired legal secretary, widow of a man I still talk to in the quiet moments, and until today, I thought the best years of my life were behind me. But this afternoon, at a small oak desk in a room that smelled like copier toner and lemon polish, a lawyer handed me the final documents confirming that my brother Thomas had left his entire estate to me, his farm, his savings, his investments, nearly $1 million, signed into my hands with one smooth stroke of a pen. I drove home, whispering plans under my breath, letting hope warm places inside me I thought had gone cold. My son David and his wife Jessica had been fighting to stay afloat for years. Medical bills, debt, the weight of wanting a family they couldn't quite afford. I imagined the look on David's face when I told him I could finally help, that his old mother wasn't just taking up space in his spare bedroom anymore. I even pictured hugging him longer than he likes just to feel that small flicker of the boy he used to be. The sun was dipping behind the houses as I pulled into the driveway. Their kitchen window was cracked open, letting out the sound of dishes and low voices. I climbed out of the car, smoothing the wrinkles in my coat, and held the envelope tight against my chest. For the first time in years, I felt steady, useful, needed. Then I stepped toward the door and froze. David's voice drifted through the open window, flat, tired, stripped of the tenderness I had been replaying in my mind. "If we don't get her into a nursing home soon," he said, "we're never getting out of this mess." Something inside me shifted, sharp and cold. My fingers went numb around the envelope. The house I had spent months helping them clean. The meals I had cooked, the laundry I had folded. All of it stood behind that window like a stage set for a life I clearly didn't understand. And before I even touched the doorknob, I knew everything was about to break. I didn't open the door right away. Instead, I stepped back into the shadow beneath the porch light and let the words settle in the air like dust. Nursing home. Mess. As if I were a bill they couldn't pay or a stain they couldn't scrub out. The envelope slipped from my fingers, landing on the welcome mat with a soft thud that felt too gentle for the way my chest tightened. Jessica's voice joined as lower, edged with frustration. "We can't keep doing this, David. She's sweet, sure, but she's slowing down. You heard the doctor. He said she's showing signs of confusion. If we wait too long, we'll lose the chance to make decisions while we still can." My breath snagged. Confusion. The only thing I'd been confused about lately was how to make groceries last longer and whether I should keep pretending not to hear them arguing in the evenings. I pressed my palm against the siding of the house to steady myself. Inside, a cabinet door shut. A plate clinked against the counter, and David sighed the way he used to when he didn't want to admit he'd done something wrong. "I know," he said quietly. "But the cost, even the cheapest place, Jessica, even yours, it's still $2,000 a month. We can barely pay our loans now." "We could keep her social security checks," Jessica whispered. "That would cover most of it." The way she said it, calm, practical, like discussing coupons, made my skin prickle. For a moment, I wondered if I'd misheard. If the exhaustion in their voices was just the weight of stress pressing down hard enough to twist their words. Maybe the wind carried things strangely. Maybe I'd stepped into a version of my life that didn't belong to me. But then David spoke again, and this time there was no way to pretend. "She'll sign whatever we put in front of her. She always does." He paused. "And when she's settled somewhere else, we'll finally have a chance to breathe." I felt myself sway. The man speaking wasn't the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest after nightmares, whose tiny hands clutched at my sweater like it was the only safe place he knew. This voice was controlled, resigned, as if he had already accepted that this was simply what children do with aging parents. Shuffle them along like outdated furniture until the house feels bigger. I crouched down and picked up the envelope, brushing off a faint trace of dirt. The weight of it had changed. Moments ago, it had felt like hope. Now it pulsed in my hands like a reminder that maybe I had misunderstood everything. My place in this home, my worth to the people I loved most. I backed away from the door, careful not to let the floorboards creak. The porch felt suddenly narrow, the air too thin. I walked toward the side yard, slipping into the dimness where the single porch bulb couldn't reach. From here, their voices blurred into indistinct murmurs. But the damage was already done. I didn't need to hear more to know there was no misunderstanding. I sank onto the small wooden bench David had built years ago during his brief woodworking phase. I used to sit there with him on warm evenings, watching him sand the edges and stain the wood, proud of how capable he looked with a tool in his hand. Now the bench felt foreign beneath me, a relic of a gentler version of my son that I suddenly couldn't place. My throat tightened. I stared at the faint glow spilling through the kitchen curtains and let myself feel the sting without fighting it. The hurt wasn't loud. It didn't crash through me. It seeped in slowly, filling all the empty cracks I had kept sealed for so long. Maybe that was worse. I tried to recall the moments that had led us here to this place where my own child could speak about me like a burden. There had been warning signs, little comments brushed aside, decisions made without asking me. I remembered Jessica suggesting with a smile too bright that I let her organize my medication. I remembered David insisting he drive whenever we went somewhere, even when I knew the way better than he did. Small things, the kinds of things you tell yourself are done out of care. But care doesn't sound like that conversation inside my house. A gust of wind rustled the leaves of the maple tree overhead, scattering a few onto the lawn. I pulled my coat tighter around me. The temperature had dropped, but I couldn't tell if the chill running along my spine came from the cold air or the realization that my place in this family wasn't what I had believed. I stayed on that bench for a long time, listening to the muffled clatter of dishes and the hum of their conversation drifting toward a future they expected me not to be part of. Eventually, the porch light flicked off, plunging the yard into a deeper shade of blue. And in that quiet, with the night settling heavy around my shoulders, a thought surfaced, steady, startling, undeniable. If my son saw me as a burden, he had no idea what I was capable of carrying. I waited until the house had gone quiet before I stood from the bench. The cold had crept into my knees, stiffening them, but the numbness in my chest drew more of my attention. I walked around to the back door, easing it open like a guest who didn't want to intrude. The kitchen lights were off now, but the faint glow from the stovetop clock cast a soft green across the counters. My reflection shimmered in the microwave door, small, tired, and suddenly unfamiliar. I placed the envelope on the table gently, as though rough handling might wake the house. The silence pressed on my ears. I could still see the shape of the conversation lingering like smoke in the air, impossible to wave away. I'd imagined this home as a place of refuge, but now it felt like a waiting room in which my presence was tolerated only until someone called the next name. I turned toward the hallway, pausing when I heard a soft creak from upstairs. I held still, letting the quiet settle again, and continued to my room. Once inside, I closed the door and leaned against it, letting the darkness wrap around me. In the dim light from the street lamp outside, my small suitcase sat in the corner, half unzipped from the laundry I hadn't finished earlier. My life had shrunk into these little piles. Socks folded in mismatched pairs. Sweaters thinned at the elbows. I wondered what David and Jessica truly saw when they looked at me now. A woman. A problem. A clock ticking too loudly. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the weight of the day sink in. The notary's office. The promise of a new beginning. The crushing blow of that overheard conversation. I pressed my fingertips to my temples, trying to steady my breath. For a moment, I felt foolish. How had I been so ready to give everything to someone who spoke of me like a bill he couldn't pay? But beneath the ache, something sturdier stirred. A memory faint but firm. My husband, William, sitting across from me at our old kitchen table the night he taught me how to read a contract properly. "People tell you who they are in the fine print," he'd said, tapping the paragraph with his pen. "Most folks just never bother to look closely." Maybe I hadn't looked closely at David in a long time. The next morning I rose early. The house still slept. I moved quietly, slipping into my coat and gathering the envelope. I walked to the corner of the neighborhood where the bus stop sat under a leaning street lamp. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but the walk helped push thoughts into order. There was someone I needed to see, someone who had known me longer than David had been alive. The bus took me downtown, past familiar storefronts, a bakery I used to visit with my husband, the bank I no longer had reason to enter. When I stepped off at Main Street, the wind chased crisp leaves along the sidewalk. I crossed to a brick building with a brass door plate that read Patterson and Clark, attorneys at law. Inside, the air smelled of paper, polished wood, and the faint citrus of furniture polish. The receptionist looked up, surprised to see me back so soon. "Mrs. Bennett, did you forget something yesterday?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "But I need to speak to Mr. Patterson. It's important." He ushered me in within minutes. The old lawyer rose from behind his desk, adjusting his glasses. "Margaret," he said warmly, "I didn't expect you today. Everything all right with the documents?" I closed the door behind me before answering. "Everything with the documents is fine," I said. "It's the people around them I'm worried about." He gestured for me to sit, concern etching into his features. I told him what I had overheard. Not every word. Some were too painful to repeat out loud, but enough for him to understand. He listened, elbows on the desk, fingers steepled the way my husband used to when he was thinking things through. When I finished, silence settled between us. Then he let out a slow breath. "I'm very sorry, Margaret, but you did the right thing coming here. If they're planning to pressure you into signing away authority, we need to put protections in place immediately." My heart lifted a fraction. "What kind of protections?" He explained. "A new trust, one that made my wishes legally firm. A durable healthcare proxy assigned to someone I trusted, not David. Clear language preventing any guardianship petition without multiple medical evaluations." I listened carefully, letting each piece lock into place inside me like puzzle corners clicking together. "And the assets?" I asked quietly. "If I wanted them to go somewhere David couldn't touch?" "That's entirely your decision," he said. "We can ensure every cent follows your instructions." A warmth bloomed in my chest. Not the soft, hopeful warmth from yesterday, but something steadier, like the heat rising from a banked fire. I realized I wasn't powerless. I had simply forgotten where my power lived. We spent over an hour reviewing papers, drafting new ones, setting dates for signatures. When I left, the cold outside felt different. Not biting, clarifying. Back at the bus stop, I sat on the bench and watched cars pass, their engines humming through the morning air. I held the folder tight, not because I feared losing it, but because for the first time since hearing my son's voice through the window, I felt anchored. David believed he could decide my future for me. He had no idea I was already writing it myself. The ride back home felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the weight of what I now carried, not the documents themselves, but the truth sitting under my ribs like a stone. When I stepped off the bus, the sky hung low with gray clouds, the kind that promised snow if the wind shifted just right. I tightened my coat and walked the final blocks to the house, rehearsing the silence I would wear when I went inside. David's car was already in the driveway. He must have left work early. My stomach fluttered with an old reflex, some mixture of worry and the hope that he might greet me kindly the way he did when he was younger. But the memory of his voice through the kitchen window washed over me, steadying my steps. Inside, I found him at the dining table with a stack of papers spread out before him. Jessica stood behind his chair, arms folded, chewing on her thumbnail. They looked up when I entered, their expressions too bright, too practiced. "Mom," David said, standing quickly. "We were going to call you. We have something we'd like you to look at." I set my purse down slowly, keeping my face calm. "All right," I said. "What is it?" He slid a document toward me. "Just some forms that could make things easier," he began. "For bills, medical stuff, if anything ever happened." Power of attorney. Bold across the top. My husband's voice echoed in my mind. People tell you who they are in the fine print. I let my fingertips rest on the page, feeling the faint texture of the printer ink, then looked up at my son. His eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. "What made you think I'd need this?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "It's not that you need it," he said, forcing a light tone. "It's just proactive, responsible. Plenty of people your age do this. Jessica chimed in, her voice soft, but too controlled. We want you to be safe, Margaret. If there's ever an emergency, David should be able to make decisions quickly. I studied her face. She had dark circles under her eyes. Exhaustion etched into her features. But beneath the worry was something harder. Urgency. Maybe even desperation. They were drowning financially, and they saw me as the nearest life raft. I lifted the first page of the packet. The legal language was familiar. Decades working in a law office had trained me to read through the polite cover words into the teeth beneath. Granting full authority, access to accounts, ability to sell assets, control over medical decisions. I set the paper back down. I'll need Mr. Patterson to look this over, I said. David's head snapped up. Why? The word shot out sharper than he intended. Jessica placed a hand on his shoulder, but he didn't soften. Mom, it's standard. You don't need a lawyer for this. I prefer it, I replied simply. Old habits. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. Or maybe worry. I wasn't sure which, but I saw the truth behind his eyes. This wasn't about protecting me. It was about securing something for them. He tried again, lowering his voice. Can we talk about this privately without lawyers and paperwork, making it complicated? I shook my head gently. No, sweetheart. Some things should be done carefully. The endearment slipped out by instinct, but it tasted strange in my mouth now. Unfamiliar. David didn't respond. His shoulders sagged, and he sank back into his chair. Jessica stared at the floor. I gathered the envelope of Thomas's documents from my purse and held it close, not to show them, but to remind myself what choices I still had. The house felt smaller than ever, as if the walls themselves had listened to every word and were waiting for my reaction. Dinner's in the fridge, Jessica said finally, her voice tight. We didn't know when you'd be home. I nodded. Thank you. Then I walked to my room, closing the door softly behind me. Inside the dim light, I exhaled for what felt like the first time since entering the house. The folder lay on my lap as I sat on the edge of the bed, and a new thought took shape, sharp, but calm. If they wanted authority over my life, they were already too late. I would finish what I had begun at Patterson's office. I would write my future cleanly without their hands hovering over the ink. And when the moment came to reveal the truth, I would be the one holding the pen. The next week unfolded with a strange, slow tension, like the air in the house had thickened while no one acknowledged it. I moved quietly through each day, careful with my steps, careful with my breath, watching David and Jessica watch me. They tried to act normal, but there was a stiffness in their voices now, a rehearsed sweetness that only sharpened my awareness. I didn't confront them, and they didn't press me. The silence between us became its own kind of language. By Thursday, all the documents Mr. Patterson and I prepared were finalized and signed. The trust was complete. The sale date for the house was confirmed, and my plans to move to Thomas's farm were arranged in a way no one could undo. I felt strangely calm, anchored by the certainty of every choice. What remained was the final conversation, the one I knew would end the version of family we had been pretending to be. Friday evening, I cooked dinner, letting familiar motions guide my hands. Rosemary chicken, roasted potatoes, green beans with lemon zest. It smelled like the kind of night a family should enjoy together, which made the truth beneath it sting even more. When we sat, David thanked me stiffly. Jessica avoided my eyes, refolding her napkin until the fabric curled. We ate in brittle silence. After a few minutes, I set my fork down and folded my hands. There's something we need to talk about. David straightened, alert. Jessica froze. I watched the pulse flutter at her neck. I heard your conversation last week, I said quietly. Every word. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. David's eyes closed for half a second, long enough to reveal guilt before fear swept in to replace it. Mom, he began. No, I said. Not this time. The room felt smaller as I continued, though my voice stayed steady. You talked about moving me into a nursing home, about using my checks, about how I'd sign anything you put in front of me. You spoke like I was already gone. Jessica swallowed hard. We were overwhelmed. We didn't mean. You meant enough, I said. People don't consider options they'd never choose. David pushed his plate away. We're struggling, Mom. We were trying to figure out how to survive. It came out wrong. It came out honest, I replied. He flinched at that, shoulders curling inward like a boy caught stealing. So what now? He asked. You hate us? You're leaving? I don't hate you, I said softly. But I'm leaving. I reached into my purse and set a single paper between us. The moving notice confirming the house sale. David stared at it as though it were a joke he didn't understand. You sold the house. His voice cracked. Without telling us? Yes, I said. Because it's mine to sell, and because I won't stay where I'm seen as a burden. Jessica's eyes filled, but the tears didn't change the truth sitting heavy between us. She whispered, Where will you go? To Thomas's farm, I answered. It's peaceful. It's mine, and I live there with the dignity I intend to keep. David stood abruptly, hands clenched at his sides. Mom, please. We got carried away. We can fix this. No, I said gently. You can feel sorry. You can regret it, but you can't fix what you broke. He sank back into his chair, defeated. Jessica wiped her cheek, unable to meet my gaze. I rose from the table, collecting my napkin. I loved you both, I said. More than you ever saw. But love cannot survive where dignity ends. That night, I packed the last of my belongings. When dawn came, I lifted my suitcase and walked down the hallway without looking back. Outside, the air was cold and clean. The sky hung in pale streaks of morning light, as if the world itself were opening a quiet door. I paused at the edge of the driveway, breathing in the crisp air, letting it fill the space where hurt had lived. Then I stepped forward toward a life that at last belonged entirely to me.